Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. This is Orphanlast, aka Skylar Madison, and today we're going to be talking about those lightning effects that I went ahead and animated into this video intro. I'm really happy with how this is turning out, and I'm not finished with it quite yet. The thing is that I'm thinking about adding a beveled effect, make it look like it's got a little bit more texture to the coin, and I'm also thinking about adding some electrical effects going across the coin, and I'm also thinking about possibly adding a light source, so that while the coin rotates, it kind of starts to shine at some particular point in time, so that it has just this extra little spark to the animation, all three of those other things. That's at least what I'm thinking right now. When I first started to work on this animation, I knew that I wanted to get rid of the terrible cloud effects in the effect schematic. Maybe there's nothing wrong with the cloud effects, maybe it's just the way that I was using it, so don't write off that specific effects node. Since I didn't have a good experience with it, it doesn't necessarily mean that everyone's going to have a terrible experience with it. The next thing that I did of relevance is I threw in the new audio that I created with the thunder sounds. My last two videos have been all about fabricating the sound of thunder, so it's time to make the lightning. This is my first effects animation ever, so basically anything that happens to be like leaves blowing in the wind, or an explosion, or lightning, or water, those are effects. And so this is the first effects animation I've ever done. But that didn't stop me from researching different styles of electricity and lightning in live footage. I also studied how other animators have approached animating those things, regardless of how realistic they are or not. I don't mind having a stylized looking lightning strike, even if that means it lacks a bit of realism. If people can see it and it looks powerful and they can identify it as being lightning, then I feel I've succeeded. The next thing of relevance that I did was I created a note level. I've tried using the traditional note-taking method in order to lay out my timing, but I've actually found that to be really irritating. I think that the normal notes that launched with OpenTunes initially, I think that they're for legitimate notes, whereas I need markers like Scotch tape on a stage for stage actors, so that the actors in the theater can hit their mark in the exact correct spot and hitting it on time. Note level is really useful for this because you can put little notes in it. Not really in-depth notes, but little tiny notes like one word or one letter. And you can mark up your timeline or X sheet really quickly and get everything laid out. The way that you create a note level is you right-click on the actual level name on a level itself. And then you click on note level on the drop-down menu that appears. This is the first time that I've really tinkered with a note level, especially inside of an actual animation, so operating it seemed a little bit foreign, but it was still serviceable. And I plan on using it more often in the future. So I listened really carefully for the sound of thunder and when it first hits. What frame does that occur? Now, the nature of lightning is like this. If lightning strikes at a far off distance, it can take a number of seconds for you to hear it strike. Sound takes time to travel. Light does take time to travel as well, but light is unbelievably faster in comparison to the speed of sound. So I felt as though having the lightning show and the thunder sound at the same time would give the impression that the lightning is striking close by, giving a sense of intensity and strength. I don't necessarily use those words to describe myself. I use those words to describe a weird feeling I want people to feel before watching one of my videos. Kind of reminiscent of something kind of like the original PlayStation introduction sound. Think of it as a sensation, if you'd like. I then create a tunes raster level and I call it lightning. The first step to creating lightning is you find your timing marker from the note level that I used earlier and you draw the full lightning spark. It's nearly instantaneous in order for the lightning to strike the ground. So there's no in-betweening from the lightning forming in the sky and then striking the ground. And we know that's how lightning works. And we know that's how lightning works because we have extremely high frames per second cameras out there nowadays that have witnessed the movement of a lightning strike. But none of that is necessary for just 24 frames per second, even 30 frames per second, even 60 frames per second. For this first lightning strike, I've been thinking of trying out an animation technique by animating blobs of color around. So I decided that the first lightning strike would primarily be composed of the paintbrush tool, which paints fills, or more accurately for OpenTunes, it paints areas. For the lightning, I strictly use a pure white color. Lightning is bright white. So when I started drawing the lightning, I made my brush size rather big and drew out a basic shape of something that looked somewhat like lightning. The next step was carving out parts that I didn't like, just to refine the shape of the lightning. I tried using the eraser for this, but to be honest, the thing that makes the lightning look the most like lightning is the selection tool. You just carve out large to small sections with the selection tool and press delete. And if you have a head on your shoulders, if you use this technique, you'll have something that looks like a bolt of lightning, or at least something that looks electrical. With the first bolt of lightning, it was a learning process. I just wanted to see if I could come up with something that looks the most like a bolt of lightning, rather than having something super stylized. And if I could reach that point, then I would start reaching towards something more stylized from that point forward. To create each frame after the first one, I decided I was going to be working in straight ahead animation. So I copied the original frame and pasted it into the next frame, and I used the selection tool in order to carve out more of the shape, just in small increments, but in as much of a stylized looking way as possible. Keep in mind that electricity and thunder tend to have a lot of sharp, angular, acute angles. By having the onion skin turned on, I'm able to see just how much or how little I've actually carved out of the original copy-paste. For the third frame, I did the same thing. I copied the second frame, pasted it into the third frame, and cut out small sections in as stylized of a way as possible. And I did that with every single frame, just cutting out little bits every frame, and doing a lot of copying and pasting. There comes a point to where the line starts to get rather thin and even starts to break apart. There's just not much left of the lightning to carve away. That's fine. Let the lightning get thinner and thinner, let it break away with each subsequent frame until there's no more lightning to carve away with the selection tool. I set this lightning level on 2s. This approach all by itself makes a really cool lightning strike. It's convincing, and once I saw that, I decided I wanted a little bit more jazz to my lightning. So as you can see on the screen right here, right now, I'm basically doing what I just described. The lightning is getting thinner and thinner and gradually breaking apart and such like that. I'll be back really soon with my voiceover so that you guys can get the next little bit. If I were to do this step again, I'd just do everything in one level, but I wanted a safety net. I wanted to create another Toons raster level and began making some interesting things happen with my lightning bolt. I started making these strings with semi-thick brushes at the start of the lightning strike, and I wasn't thinking of making them wind, twist, or wave or anything like that. This is electricity. Its behavior is volatile and unpredictable. As I went through frame by frame, I gradually made the brush for these strings thinner and thinner, and eventually they became so thin that the actual bolt of lightning was pretty dang thin. And so I started to draw these strings out as little electrical currents, and as the lightning bolt fades away and breaks apart more and more, these little electrical currents would connect to other parts of the breaking lightning bolt less and less. Again, I wasn't worried about making waves or weird corkscrew effects or anything with these strings or little electrical currents or anything like that. I kind of felt like a little kid with a crayon. No real thought from the shape of one frame to the other. I did, however, turn on the onion skin to the previous frame so that it distinctly looked different from the other frame, but not so different that it might look wrong. When it's all said and done, I realized that the original lightning level was animated on 1s, and the second level with these strings and little sparks of electricity were animated on 1s. I think this works for the better. It was an accident, but it wound up working out just fine. For the second bolt of lightning, I did the same sort of workflow, but more stylized, and all on 1s for the actual bolt of lightning. The sound for the lightning sounds like 2 strikes. Here, let me show you. So I made sure that I had one strike and then a second strike emanating from the same source in the sky. And although I was really happy with the look I got here, I actually lost all of my work for the second strike of lightning. You'll see me animate it a second time. For the life in me, I don't understand why I lost this second bolt of lightning. And although this aggravates me, and it still kind of does, I don't know if I am the one to be blamed or if it's OpenToonz, to be honest. My second take on the second bolt of lightning wound up being better than my first take on the second bolt of lightning. Practice makes perfect. The thing is, if I were to blame OpenToonz for the lost work, I don't even know how to describe what happened, so I don't even know how to even describe the bug, or if it is a bug, to the developers. I mean, I did have autosave turned off, but I distinctly remember saving my progress, but I guess somewhere in the footage it might show that I didn't save, but then again I sometimes press Ctrl S to save all. I guess I turned it off because the previous animation I was working on dealt with the effects schematic, and I knew that I'd eventually have to work with the effects schematic for this animation, so I never really turned it back on. So in the end, it could have been my fault. So eventually, pretty soon here, you're going to see me kind of playing around with the effects schematic. There's a lot of things that I toyed with that didn't really work very well for the specific effects that I wanted. I just wanted a glow effect. But in the end, I wound up duplicating my 2 lightning levels. And the 2 lightning levels that were lower on the stacking order, I decided to go add effects, light, glow. Maybe there's a more effective way of doing this that doesn't require duplicating levels, but this did work. I just couldn't find the combination of effects that would just make a glowing effect on the entire exterior of the object. The glow effects literally makes an object look like it's a lampshade with a bright light in it. So my experimentation led me to this direction. I never said I was a professional at the effects schematic. It's when I decided to render that I started to have some problems. It just crashed every single time that I would reach frame 114, and I suspect that this has something to do with the effects schematic because eventually I got rid of the glow effect for my logo, and suddenly OpenToonz would render the animation no problem. So I thought maybe baking the glow effect into the background might give me more processing power to render the glow effect on my logo. This didn't work. Any attempt at rendering the glow effects from the effects schematic on my logo was a complete failure. Now, I shared this animation with Rodney. He's a buddy of mine, a fan, and really helpful, actually. And we're trying to figure this out. We're trying to figure out why OpenToonz just simply will not render the glow effects from the effects schematic on my logo. Initially, I thought it might be because it was a PNG and I threw it in, but I do remember clicking import. When I clicked import, OpenToonz automatically transferred the PNG from being a PNG to being a TIFF file. That's the default sort of file that OpenToonz works with, TIFF files. And I'm okay with that. The problem is, if it's the same thing as any other level, then why is OpenToonz treating this TIFF that I thought was a PNG like a PNG? I don't understand. Now, if any developers are listening to what I'm saying, and if you'd like to have a copy of this particular animation so that you might be able to detect what the bug might be, and I do suspect that it is a bug, feel free to contact me. It was around this point in time that I realized that I lost my second lightning strike, and so I went about reanimating it even though I was having rendering problems. I set that aside for now so that I could animate the second bolt of lightning again. Yes, it was frustrating, but in the end I got a better looking animation. Also, in the end, baking the lightning into the background wound up being something I really didn't want to do. So at one point I settled with having a blue background throughout the entire animation, without a glow effect around my logo. And I thought that was that. That was it. So I posted on Twitter at this point that people should see a rather large bug in my next video. I'm not quite sure if it's a bug, but I am fairly sure that it is. And then at that point, after I made that tweet, I then turned off OpenToonz and Bandicam, and I thought that was that. But it just kept eating at me. I felt like I was compromising with this issue. So in order to get the glow effects that I wanted on the logo, since the effects schematic wouldn't let me render a glow effects on the logo, I decided that I'd just use the airbrush on a raster level and brush it in frame by frame manually. And that's how I got the glow effect on my logo. Now, you need to be careful with that, because if you're doing it frame by frame and then the object stops moving, you could have this weird animated glow effect that you might not want. It just jitters about. So I wound up exposing the last glow effect for the rest of the animation. You can see that the glow effect actually remains the same size during the last little bit of the actual movement of the logo. Now, for your viewing pleasure at 100 times speed, you see me trying to render this animation over and over and over again. And as you can see, it's just failed attempt after failed attempt after failed attempt. Now, you may see a render where it goes to 100%. That's me trying to bake the lightning effects and the black background and such all together. So what you're seeing on the screen right now is basically what I felt like I had to compromise with. I felt like since I couldn't add a glow effect to the logo, I had to have a blue background. I wanted the background to be dark, but I needed to show some sort of contrast so that there's a difference between the portions of the logo that are black and the background. But then again, if someone's colorblind, they're not going to really notice any difference. It's going to be as if it's black anyways. So this didn't really feel like a very good compromise. So I felt like, well, maybe I should just make a raster level at this point and add a glow effect with one of the My Paint brushes. Now at first I thought, maybe a sparkly brush, but that wound up looking weird when I played it back. And so I thought, well, okay, let's just use an airbrush, something that would look like it came from the effects schematic. The thing is as long as the object is moving, you can manually put a glow effect on the object. But once it stops moving, you don't want too much movement out of that glow effect. You want it as uniform as possible. And I don't have much advice on how to make sure that it's uniform. Maybe using the Animate tool. If you decide to create your own effects without the effects schematic, just use the Animate tool on occasion to adjust the size, I guess, when an object stops moving or stops moving left to right, I guess, is what I'm trying to say, and starts moving towards the Z-axis or something like that. Use the Animate tool, scale it down, maybe skew it if you have to, things like that. But it is totally possible to use a raster level in order to create your effects. You just have to be super, super precise. And I'm not really quite sure if I have that much patience. So as slow as the effects schematic is, and as much as I complain about it, doing all of your effects manually is a nightmare in comparison. It is way slower. But even still, I would like to see improvements with the effects schematic. I've complained about it a lot, and I still stand by my critique of the effects schematic. But in the end, it is faster, it is more accurate, way more uniform than trying to do it all by yourself, frame by frame. Anyways, guys, that pretty much concludes it for this video. If you guys enjoyed it, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you guys would like to see more notifications from me, feel free to click on the bell. And if you guys would like to see more content made by me, feel free to click on anything that is appearing on the screen right now. Thank you very much for your time.